ask vet ek standa hetir Yggdrasill horbaðnar ausin hvíta ári þaðan koma dogvar þers í dalla falla stendr yfir grunn urðar brunni. I know an ash tree named Yggdrasill, a high tree speckled with white clay. Dewdrops fall from it upon the valleys. It stands forever green above Urth's well. Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Every time that I've seen this oak tree officially listed as one of the oldest in Sweden, of course, Yggdrasil, the great tree of Norse mythology, has come to mind. And what I want to talk about in this video is the surprising variety of names used for this tree, which I think are not always what people would anticipate today, and don't include some names that people do anticipate today. So in fact, the name Yggdrasil, straight up and plain as a name for the tree, occurs one time in the Poetic Edda in the stanza of Völuspá that I think I will wind up quoting at the beginning of this video. There is a tree named Yggdrasil, a high tree speckled with white clay. From there the dews fall into the valleys, etc. Now that is only true in some manuscripts that quote that stanza, because of course we have the Codex Regius text of Völuspá, we have the Hauksbók manuscript text of Völuspá, and then different manuscripts of Snorri's prose that quote Völuspá. In some of those manuscripts the text does say even there Yggdrasill's askr, ash tree of Yggdrasil. And in fact most places in the Poetic Edda where this tree is described, it is described as Yggdrasill's askr. That includes all of the occurrences in Grimfrost, where this tree is described many times, or named many times, and all the other instances in Völuspá. So it seems like, in fact, it is more originally, or maybe more authentically, called Yggdrasill's askr, ash tree of Yggdrasil, than it is called just plain Yggdrasil. Now, why would that be? Who or what is Yggdrasil that this is the ash tree of that? The oldest explanation, sort of the classic explanation for this name is, Ygr is a name of Odin, terrifier, terror, something of that nature. Drasil is a poetic word for horse, and so the oldest, or again, like the classic explanation is that this is the horse of Odin, because Odin sacrificed himself on Yggdrasil according to Havamal stanza 138, although he doesn't specify that it's Yggdrasil. We can probably infer that that's the tree Odin would sacrifice himself on. And so since he rode it, it is his horse, he rode it by riding the gallows, right, the hangman's noose. That kind of gallows humor literally is certainly not unusual for Old Norse, but I would expect that if that were the explanation, it would be called Yggdrasil, the tree of Ygr, not Ygr, Odin tree. Odin, or Odin horse. So Odin horse, not Odin's horse. What does that mean? Anatoly Lieberman's explanation is that in fact Yggdrasil might be a name for Sleipnir, Odin's horse, or for Odin and Sleipnir regarded as kind of a unit, like a centaur-like unit. We don't know of any stories in which the two of them would be regarded as a unit, but that seems like an intriguing possibility, and it's one that deserves a little bit more attention, because in fact this is an unanswered question. Exactly who or what Yggdrasil originally refers to and why the name comes to be applied to the tree. Now, the tree has a few other names, some of which make a little bit more sense in context, but none of which are as widely known today. Let me mention to you before getting into that I am here at Grimgard, the Viking city under construction by Grimfrost, who were so generous as to bring me here to Sweden for Midsommar. And they're lucky to have this beautiful ancient tree on their property. This tree might go back to the Viking Age. You can get all kinds of great stuff from Grimfrost, all kinds of Viking replica clothes, tools, weapons, board games, and you can get books from them too, including my books, like the second edition of the Poetic Edda translation coming out in September this year, or the Wanderer's Journal, this blank journal that you can write in that has quotes from Havamal transcribed into runes and translated by me. Also, I'll be appearing with Johan Hegg on the Grimfrost podcast on August 1st, 2025. So watch out for that interview. It was a lot of fun to do at their Longhouse headquarters. Now, other names of the tree include probably the Mjotvedr that is mentioned at the beginning of Völuspá. The Volva or Cirrus, who narrates this poem about the creation and destruction of the world at Ragnarok, mentions that she remembers a time long ago when the Mjotvedr was fyr mold neðan, the fate tree was below the earth, i.e. probably that it was still a seed that had not yet sprouted. That certainly makes good sense as a name for Yggdrasil, fate tree. And then we have potentially Hlautvid. Now, Hlaut is sacrificial blood, like from a horse. We read about the Hlaut that is spread in a sacrificial ritual in Bygge saga, one of the sagas of Isenders. Now, at the end of Völuspá, after Ragnarok, the god Hunir will survive, and he will kjósa Hlautvid, will choose a tree of sacrificial blood. That may well be a successor Yggdrasil, a tree that would be splattered with the blood of sacrifices. Don't know, but there's always a lot more questions than answers in Norse myth. Another name that makes premier sense for the tree is Mimamedir, the tree of Mimir. Now, Mimir, his name appears in a lot of different forms. Mimir, Mimr, apparently Mime. It would be the source of Mimamedir, Mimi's tree, Mimir's tree. Mimir has his well of wisdom. One drinks it in order to gain wisdom, as Odin did. Odin had to give up an eye in order to do that. And that well being at the base of one of the roots of Yggdrasil's Askr, it was certainly meaningful for the tree to be named after Mimir and his well. So that name occurs in Fjolsvinnsmál, part of Svipdagsmál, a not very well-known Eddic poem. It's not always included in translations and editions of the Poetic Edda. It is included in my new second edition of the Poetic Edda, because even though it's known only from pretty late manuscripts, it apparently does survive an oral transmission from the 900s, as most of the poems of the Poetic Edda do. So it is a good source of Norse mythology. I think that Mimamedir is maybe the most appropriate and understandable name that we know for the tree. And then it's worth mentioning that in Grimnismal we hear about another tree, Laeradr, or Laeradr, we don't really know if that A is long or short, that Heidrun and Eikthirnir, the goat and the buck that dwell on top of Valhall, they eat the leaves of this tree. Now, Yggdrasil is an ash tree. Eikthirnir would mean something like oak stabber, so maybe Laeradr is actually an oak versus the ash tree Yggdrasil, but they don't seem to be particularly particular about tree types in Icelandic poetry and sagas. But if Laeradr is a name for Yggdrasil, we don't necessarily know what Laeradr means, so it doesn't necessarily help us, but it could be the same tree. Keep in mind that, like in Volsunga Saga, the tree Barnstokkr that Odin sticks the sword that will later be reforged into Gramr into is called alternately an oak tree and an apple tree, so they may not necessarily care that much, especially in Icelandic texts, about what type of tree any given tree is being called. Well, let's look at some of the names of the great tree, which, by the way, I mentioned that names that people associate with the tree today may not necessarily have been in the Viking Age. They never call it anything that resembles world tree in Old Norse, right? Like a heimtre or heimvedr or something like that. That name is an invention of um, modern interpretations of the myths. The tree does have a root that is over men, over human beings, humans, it almost sounds like, over us, over Midgardr. That root is apparently in Osgardr, which is over us. There's a root that is in Hell, and there's a root that is in Jotunheimar. Uh, so, of course, those are the main roots that are the main realms that our myths take place in. There could be roots in the other realms as well, but those are the ones that are mentioned in Grimnismal, and then that's repeated by Snorri Sturluson in his prose edda and Gylfaginning. Well, for now, from beautiful Sweden at Grimfrost's developing Grimgard, the Viking town, I'm wishing you all the best.